The glittering lights of the global music industry have always possessed a unique, almost hypnotic ability to blind the public to the turbulent realities unfolding just beneath the surface of stardom. For years, the traditional trajectory of a pop icon followed a predictable and strictly managed script, one defined by an initial meteoric rise, a period of ubiquitous cultural dominance, and an eventual, graceful transition into the status of a legacy act. Yet, in the hyper-accelerated landscape of the modern entertainment ecosystem, where an artist's entire reputation can be re-evaluated, recontextualized, and thoroughly dismantled in the span of a single viral news cycle, the old rules no longer seem to apply. Instead, contemporary culture frequently witnesses dramatic, high-stakes narratives of sudden alienation, where figures who were once universally celebrated as symbols of progressive empowerment suddenly find themselves navigating an icy, unforgiving wall of public indifference and critical skepticism. This profound shift leaves both industry insiders and casual observers wrestling with a complex web of questions regarding the true nature of fame, the fleeting loyalty of modern audiences, and the incredibly thin line that separates a celebrated cultural pioneer from an outcast fighting to reclaim a narrative that has rapidly spun out of her control. To fully understand how an artist can transition so rapidly from the absolute pinnacle of critical and commercial adulation to a position of defensive isolation, one must carefully analyze the delicate machinery of celebrity culture, a system that routinely demands total perfection while simultaneously capitalizing on the dramatic downfall of its most prominent figures. If you want to stay informed on the deeper stories behind the headlines and track how these fascinating cultural shifts continue to reshape the entertainment world, please take a brief moment right now to subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you never miss an update. The journey through the highs and lows of modern celebrity is rarely straightforward, and examining these complex career trajectories provides invaluable insight into the evolving mechanics of public perception and the relentless pressures of the global spotlight to properly set the stage for this unfolding drama. It is essential to look back at the cultural landscape of the late 2010s, an era that was actively searching for a new kind of archetype within the mainstream pop lexicon. For decades, the music industry had maintained a remarkably rigid, homogeneous standard for what a female superstar was permitted to look like, how she was expected to behave, and what kind of message she was allowed to project to the masses. The prevailing aesthetic was one of hyper-curated, highly sanitized perfection that left very little room for authentic vulnerability or structural nonconformity. It was into this precisely ordered environment that an explosive, fiercely independent force erupted, completely shattering the pre-existing mold with an intoxicating blend of classically trained musical virtuosity, uninhibited body positivity, and an unapologetic celebration of identity. This emergence felt less like a standard promotional campaign and more like a genuine cultural movement, capturing the imagination of millions who had long felt entirely excluded from the narrow definitions of mainstream beauty and success. The music itself was an irresistible high-energy fusion of retro soul, contemporary hip-hop, and sparkling pop hooks that demanded attention, forcing its way onto global radio airwaves and into the cultural zeitgeist through sheer, undeniable charisma. During this golden period, it seemed as though the artist could do absolutely no wrong, as every subsequent release was greeted with ecstatic critical reviews, multi-platinum sales certifications, and a cascade of prestigious industry awards that solidified her status as the definitive voice of a generation. However, the very same qualities that initially propelled this extraordinary ascent, the radical transparency, the refusal to adhere to traditional industry boundaries, and the outspoken defense of marginalized identities, would eventually become the primary battlegrounds for an intense, multifaceted public relations conflict. As the initial euphoria of widespread cultural adoration began to cool, a quieter, more insidious undercurrent of skepticism began to form across various social media platforms and media outlets. The entertainment industry has an established, historically documented tendency to elevate pioneering figures to dizzying heights, often placing them on unstable pedestals only to watch with microscopic scrutiny for the slightest sign of vulnerability or misstep. For an individual who had explicitly built an entire brand around the concept of radical self-love and the defiant rejection of societal expectations, the scrutiny was doubly intense, creating an environment where even minor creative shifts or personal proclamations were viewed through an incredibly polarized lens. This growing tension remained largely beneath the surface during the peak years of commercial dominance. masked by a steady stream of chart-topping singles and high-profile public appearances that suggested an unbreakable bond between the performer and the public. Yet, experienced industry veterans know that public sentiment is an incredibly volatile commodity, capable of shifting with remarkable speed when the carefully constructed narrative of empowerment collides with the messy, unpredictable realities of human conflict and legal dispute. The turning point came not with a sudden failure of musical output, but with a series of deeply unsettling, highly publicized allegations that struck directly at the heart of the artist's carefully cultivated public persona. When an individual has spent years positioning themselves as a champion of inclusivity, kindness, and workplace empowerment, any legal or personal accusation that suggests the exact opposite behavior creates a profound, almost irreconcilable cognitive dissonance within the fanbase. The subsequent legal proceedings and the resulting media firestorm effectively fractured the monolithic support that had previously shielded the star from mainstream criticism, opening the floodgates for a much broader, more aggressive reevaluation of her career, her behavior, and her artistic relevance. In the wake of these intense controversies, a lengthy period of relative artistic silence followed, during which the industry underwent a massive structural transformation, shifting heavily away from traditional radio dominance toward a highly fragmented, algorithmically driven streaming model. When the time finally arrived to mount a grand creative comeback and reassert dominance over the musical landscape, the artist entered a completely altered world, one that was no longer universally receptive to the familiar formulas of the past. The stage was thus set for a monumental confrontation between a defiant legacy diva determined to defend her historical achievements and a transformed public that appeared increasingly hesitant to grant her the easy redemption she so clearly sought. The unfolding reality of this artistic comeback has proven to be an incredibly stark departure from the triumphant narratives that usually characterize the return of a multi-Grammy-winning icon to the global stage. When an individual has achieved the monumental height of releasing back-to-back multi-platinum anthems that define the global cultural landscape, there is an implicit expectation that any subsequent body of work will automatically command the same level of widespread fascination and commercial velocity. However, the release of the fifth studio album, provocatively titled Bitch, has instead exposed a deep and seemingly widening chasm between the artist's internal perception of her career longevity and the brutal, data-driven reality of the contemporary music marketplace. The early warning signs of this commercial disconnect became impossible to ignore during the initial promotional rollout, which saw a string of carefully calculated singles completely fail to gain any meaningful traction with the public. Prominent tracks like Love in Real Life and Still Bad, which were explicitly designed to recapture the infectious, high-energy pop-soul magic of her previous eras, suffered the ultimate indignity of failing to enter the charts entirely, leading to their abrupt and highly unusual removal from the final album tracklist. This aggressive damage control strategy did little to reverse the negative momentum, as subsequent official singles, including Don't Make Me Love You and the aggressive title track itself, similarly cratered upon arrival, completely missing the mark with both streaming audiences and traditional radio programmers alike. Even a high-profile, strategic collaboration with rising rap star Sexy Red on the track Hose, specially tied to a major cinematic release for the legendary Scary Movie soundtrack franchise, completely failed to spark the viral moment the label had so desperately calculated. According to devastating early industry chart projections compiled by Hits Double Daily, the full album is currently tipped to entirely miss the top 20 of the definitive Billboard 200 chart, a statistical reality that would have been completely unthinkable just a few short years ago when every single piece of music bearing her name was practically guaranteed a place at the very top of the musical hierarchy. Confronted with this undeniable and rapid erosion of her chart dominance, the 38-year-old singer has chosen to mount an incredibly fierce, multi-front defensive campaign through the media, using a revealing and deeply polarizing interview with the Los Angeles Times to aggressively reframe the entire conversation surrounding her current career struggles. Rather than attributing the disappointing commercial reception of her new music to shifting consumer tastes, a lack of cohesive creative direction, or the natural evolution of the pop landscape, she has directly and unequivocally leveled accusations of systemic bias against her vocal detractors. In her view, the intense public skepticism and the cold reception to her latest creative output have absolutely nothing to do with the quality of the songs or her public actions, but are instead entirely driven by deeply entrenched, intersecting societal prejudices. She stated clearly and without hesitation that she believes the vast majority of the criticisms and dislike aimed at her are fundamentally fatphobic, racist, and sexist in nature, presenting her current professional difficulties as a direct consequence of her unique identity. She expanded on this perspective by arguing that the core issue lies in the fact that she is a fat black woman existing completely outside the narrow, historical parameters in which mainstream society dictates an individual of her demographic should exist. Throughout her entire life and career, she notes, she has consistently been characterized by observers as being a little too much, an inherent trait of her expansive personality that she now fiercely embraces. In a moment of pure defiance directed squarely at her critics, she posed a pointed rhetorical question, asking whether she is truly too much or if the rest of the world is simply not enough, concluding with the powerful declaration that she would far rather be perceived as annoying by the public than find herself reduced to complete societal invisibility. This fierce refusal to bow to public pressure or acknowledge the downward trend of commercial metrics extends to an outright dismissal of the historical standard by which all pop stars are ultimately judged, namely the ability to consistently generate hit records. In a series of statements that have sent shockwaves through the music industry and ignited fierce debates among chart analysts, she claimed that she no longer possesses any fundamental need to release hit singles because she has already achieved an elite tier of historical success that cements her legacy forever. When confronted with the reality that commentators and music enthusiasts frequently point to her collapsing chart numbers as proof of a fading career, she responded with palpable condescension, asserting that when haters attempt to discuss charts, she simply reminds them that she has already accomplished those exact feats at the absolute highest level. From her perspective, once an artist has successfully reached the mountaintop of commercial viability, the entire motivation for creating art undergoes a profound transformation, moving away from the pursuit of numerical validation and shifting toward an exclusive focus on personal happiness and authentic self-expression. Yet, this comforting narrative of detached artistic enlightenment stands in sharp, almost irreconcilable contrast to her simultaneous decision to compare herself directly to some of the most statistically dominant and enduring icons in the entire history of popular music. Despite having released only 2 genuinely successful mainstream albums throughout her entire career, 2019's groundbreaking "'Cause I Love You" and 2022's widely celebrated special, she unhesitatingly likened her current artistic status to that of global legends like Dolly Parton, Whitney Houston, and Mariah Carey, the latter of whom famously holds an astonishing 19 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Proclaiming herself to be a true diva in an era where she feels genuine divas have become a tragic, rapidly dying breed, she defined this elite category as a uniquely talented, confident, and beautiful woman who possesses a bit of a natural flirtatious energy, firmly placing herself within that exact legendary lineage. Beyond the theoretical debates over artistic legacy and societal prejudice, however, lies a much more concrete, highly visible structural explanation that she herself has frequently raised to explain her sudden, dramatic displacement from the cultural mainstream. Prior to her latest media appearances, she took to the social media platform X to express her deep frustration with the fundamental evolution of the music industry itself, specifically blaming a severe lack of traditional radio play for her heavily diminished presence on the global music charts. She argued passionately that the entire landscape of the entertainment business had undergone a massive destabilizing transformation over the past 3 years, a period during which modern digital streaming almost completely replaced traditional terrestrial radio as the primary driver of musical consumption. This structural shift dealt a particularly devastating blow to her specific commercial model, as she had built her initial multi-platinum empire as a certified radio darling whose infectious, universally appealing pop hooks were perfectly optimized for constant rotation across traditional global airwaves. According to her view, this was the primary mechanism through which her massive global fanbase originally discovered her music, and the sudden erosion of that traditional pipeline left her uniquely vulnerable to the unpredictable, algorithmically driven whims of modern streaming curation. Yet, even while dissecting these complex macroeconomic industry shifts, She found it impossible to ignore the elephant in the room, explicitly noting that a highly publicized, incredibly damaging attack on her career had fundamentally altered her trajectory. This candid admission served as a direct acknowledgement of the severe fallout from an explosive fat-shaming and harassment lawsuit filed against her by her former tour dancers. A legal nightmare that was only officially dropped last year but whose toxic reputational residue clearly continues to cast a long, dark, and highly restrictive shadow over her entire artistic comeback. To truly comprehend the staggering scale of this ongoing cultural and legal drama, one must contrast the artist's current defensive posture with the unparalleled heights of her historical peak. An era defined by an almost unprecedented level of critical adulation and commercial dominance. At the absolute zenith of her cultural influence, the singer, born Melissa Viviane Jefferson, achieved a rare form of pop culture ubiquity where her signature tracks became the definitive soundtrack to the late 2010s and early 2020s. Her breakout masterpiece, Truth Hurts, experienced an extraordinary slow-burn ascent that eventually culminated in a historic 7-week reign at the absolute summit of the Billboard Hot 100 chart, establishing her as a formidable force capable of dominating both the pop and hip-hop spheres simultaneously. This monumental achievement was quickly followed by a succession of multi-platinum anthems like Good as Hell and Juice, which solidified her unique brand of high-energy, infectious self-love as a highly lucrative commercial genre. The momentum appeared entirely unstoppable when her smash single, About Damn Time, topped the charts globally and went on to claim the highly coveted Record of the Year title at the prestigious Grammy Awards. Representing the ultimate validation from the highest echelons of the global music establishment. Dolan's golden age, she was not merely a pop star, but a universally celebrated cultural icon whose very image was frequently utilized by major corporations, media institutions, and social movements as the ultimate symbol of progressive transformation and authentic empowerment within a historically exclusionary industry. This meticulously constructed empire of positivity and cultural goodwill came crashing down with catastrophic speed in the summer of 2023. Following the filing of a deeply unsettling and explosive lawsuit that threatened to permanently dismantle her entire public persona. 3 of her former tour dancers, Crystal Williams, Noelle Rodriguez, and Arianna Davis, initiated legal action in the Los Angeles County Superior Court, leveling a series of shocking allegations that stood in direct, diametric opposition to everything the star publicly championed. The comprehensive legal complaint included vivid accusations of sexual harassment, religious and racial discrimination, false imprisonment, and the systematic creation of a deeply toxic, hostile work environment behind the scenes of her highly celebrated live tours. Most damaging of all to her core brand, however, were the specific claims that she had engaged in intense, hypocritical fat-shaming behavior toward her own dance troupe, allegedly pressuring performers about their weight and creating an atmosphere of extreme psychological duress. The mere existence of these allegations ignited an instantaneous, highly polarized media firestorm, forcing millions of devoted fans and industry partners to confront a profound sense of disillusionment as the carefully cultivated image of a benevolent, inclusive champion of body positivity was suddenly forced to defend itself against accusations of systemic workplace cruelty and exploitation. The intricate legal battle took a dramatic turn in December of last year when the highly contentious Ming claims were officially dismissed by the court, a crucial development that the artist immediately seized upon as a total public relations and moral victory. Breaking her long-standing silence on the specific mechanics of the legal dispute, she took to her official Instagram account to release an emotional, deeply defiant statement expressing her intense gratitude that what she characterized as the absolute truth had finally been brought to light. She informed her millions of followers that the specific fat-shaming accusations against her had been formally dropped by her accusers, explicitly stating that the plaintiffs had ultimately conceded that these specific claims possessed absolutely no merit within a court of law. She argued passionately that there was never any credible evidence to suggest that she had ever terminated an employee's contract due to weight gain, forcefully reiterating that such an event simply never occurred throughout her career. Instead, she offered a sharp counter-narrative, claiming that the dancers in question were not terminated because of their physical appearance, but were instead let go for taking an unauthorized private audio recording of a team meeting without her consent and subsequently distributing it to former employees. For an artist whose entire career legacy had been pushed to the absolute brink of total destruction by these specific body-shaming allegations, the judicial dismissal represented a monumental sigh of relief and a critical opportunity to begin the arduous process of rebuilding her shattered reputation despite this significant courtroom triumph regarding the weight-related allegations. The broader legal war is far from over, and the lingering shadow of the remaining charges continues to heavily complicate her ongoing efforts to mount a successful artistic comeback. In her public declarations, she has made it abundantly clear that she has no intention of quietly settling the remaining components of the lawsuit, which still include serious allegations of sexual harassment and maintaining a hostile workplace environment. She stated with absolute certainty that she will continue to aggressively fight every single remaining claim in open court until her name is entirely cleared, presenting herself not as a wrongdoer seeking a quiet resolution, but as an innocent victim determined to see justice prevail. She emphasized that she has spent her entire professional life explicitly encouraging, supporting, and elevating individuals with bigger bodies, frequently sharing her massive global platform with marginalized performers who had historically been denied access to the mainstream spotlight. To have her life's work recontextualized as a source of trauma for other plus-size women was described by the singer as a devastating, deeply painful experience that has haunted her daily since the very moment the initial headlines broke. This prolonged emotional and legal siege forced her into a period of painful public silence, during which she chose to allow her legal team to lead the defense while she quietly prepared for the monumental task of reclaiming her position within an industry that has grown increasingly cautious of her highly controversial public profile. Ultima Thule. The unfolding narrative of this dramatic career transition serves as a powerful, highly instructive case study in the extreme volatility of modern fame and the rapidly evolving standards of public accountability in the digital era. The stark contrast between her self-proclaimed status as a legendary, timeless diva in the vein of Whitney Houston or Mariah Carey, and the reality of an album struggling to crack the top 20 of the Billboard charts, highlights the incredible difficulty of regaining public trust once the delicate illusion of celebrity perfection has been shattered. The pop music landscape is notoriously unforgiving, and when an artist's primary cultural appeal is explicitly rooted